Okay, let's unpack this. You're maybe in the French learning trenches, right?
Hmm.
Juggling grammar drills, maybe half listened to French podcasts, language app notifications going off.
Oh, yeah. And that French novel just sitting there.
Exactly.
Meh.
One judging you from the nightstand. It can feel, well, as one of our sources put it, like le bordel, a total mess.
And what's interesting is that feeling, being a bit all over the place. It's like practically universal for language learners.
Absolutely. Which is exactly where we're diving in today. We're going deep on this idea of a natural order of acquisition for learning French.
Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, we got some really cool sources. There's a video from InnerFrench asking if there's sort of a hidden best way to learn. Then another great one from Français Authentique with real practical tips for building a solid learning routine.
Okay. Practical is good.
And insights from Florence Test. She's a French language teaching expert from TV5 Amadi. Lots of experience there.
Right. So our mission really is to figure out if there's maybe a more intuitive way to learn French.
Yeah, and how you, listening, can actually make progress without feeling like you're just, wading through a swamp.
Trying to distill it down to what really works, what clicks.
So this natural order of acquisition idea,
Yeah.
it sounds a bit, well, academic maybe.
A little bit, yeah. But it actually comes from watching how we all learn our first language, kids.
Stephen Krashen,
Yeah,
big name in language learning, he really pushed this idea.
exactly. Building on how kids just seem to absorb their native language. And they do it in a specific order, a sequence.
Yeah, that's the core thing. Children don't just randomly grab words and grammar. They follow these predictable steps.
A baby doesn't start with complex sentences. It's step by step.
Right, and Krashen said, hey, maybe something similar happens when we learn a second language, like French.
Similar, yeah, though maybe not identical. He called it this natural order, suggesting we all tend to follow certain developmental sequences.
Okay, can we make that more concrete, like an example?
Yeah, the InnerFrench video had a great one for English learners in negation, how they say no.
Yeah.
First, it's often just no, like no go, simple.
Uh-huh.
Then maybe it becomes I no go, adding the subject.
Right.
Later, you might get something like I can no go, using a modal but still missing the not.
Okay, I see the progression.
And finally, they land on the standard I do not go. It's like this built-in pathway.
So it's like our brains are kind of wired to figure these things out in a set order, even if someone tells us the rule earlier.
Pretty much. And this isn't just grammar, apparently. It applies to, learning sounds, pronunciation.
And vocabulary, too.
And vocabulary, yeah. There seem to be sequences there as well.
Okay, that's fascinating. And what's really surprising, you mentioned.
Well, one thing is how consistent this order seems to be, for almost everyone.
Regardless of how they're learning. Classroom, apps, podcasts.
Yeah, seems like it. Whether you're in school, using Duolingo, or just listening to French radio, the underlying order seems pretty similar.
That's kind of wild. So the person sweating over verb charts might be on a similar internal track as someone just watching Netflix?
In terms of the acquisition order, yeah, potentially. Another really interesting bit is that the order isn't vastly different.
Even with all the cognitive differences.
Even with those differences, the general path seems, remarkably similar.
Okay, and the most counterintuitive part you mentioned earlier about being taught the rules.
Right, that you still seem to go through these stages even if someone explicitly teaches you the correct grammar right at the start.
Like the negation example again. You learn do not in lesson 1.
But you'll probably still have a phase of saying, I know eat, or something similar. It's like your brain isn't ready for the final form yet.
That really makes you think, especially about things in French that seem hard for ages, like,
The pronoun en moi?
yes, exactly. You hear it all the time, but using it correctly takes forever for lots of learners.
And the theory would suggest that's because comes later in this natural acquisition sequence. Doesn't matter how often you hear it early on.
Your brain just isn't ready to slot it in properly yet.
Exactly. Now, gotta say, not every expert is 100% on board with how much grammar teaching can or can't influence this. There's debate there.
Okay, so it's not totally settled science on the teaching aspect.
Right. But, as the InnerFrench video pointed out, the basic idea that these developmental sequences exist, that seems to be pretty widely accepted.
Most people agree learners generally go through these kinds of stages.
Yeah, that core idea seems solid.
Okay, so if this natural order exists, what actually, determines it? Why that order?
That's the big question researchers are digging into now. What shapes this sequence?
Our sources didn't give a definitive list, did they?
No, but the InnerFrench video touched on factors experts are looking at. Things like, how easy is something to actually notice when you hear it?
Salience, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. How complex is the rule itself? How clear is the meaning? How often do you actually encounter it?
Frequency makes sense.
And crucially, how similar or different is it to your own native language?
Okay, so your first language does play a role.
Mm-hmm.
But you said earlier it doesn't change the order.
Right, that's the key distinction. Your native language doesn't seem to change the sequence. You learn things in French.
Right.
But it definitely affects how fast you move through those stages.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. InnerFrench mentions Spanish speakers learning French articles, Spanish has a similar system.
So they pick it up relatively quickly.
Generally, yeah. It feels familiar, but if your language, say, Polish, has no articles at all.
It's going to take longer to get the hang of them. Makes sense.
Totally. Or flip it around. A French speaker learning English might overuse the present perfect tense like, I have seen him yesterday.
Because it kind of maps onto their passé composé.
Exactly. Even though simple past I saw him is better there. But again, it's about the speed and interference, not changing the fundamental learning order for English grammar overall.
Okay, got it. So speed, not the sequence itself. That's a really important takeaway.
Definitely.
And thinking about these sequences, they're not like rigid levels, are they? Like in a video game where you master level 1, then move to level 2.
No, not at all. That's a key point. Moving into a new stage doesn't mean you've 100% perfected the previous one. Far from it.
So you can still make mistakes from earlier stages.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when you're tired, stressed, or trying to say something complex. Those older patterns can pop back up. It's more like a gradual shift.
You start using the newer stuff more often, but the old habits linger.
Precisely. And sometimes progress actually looks like making more errors for a while.
Wait, how does that work?
Because you're trying out more complex structures. You're experimenting, pushing your boundaries. So you might make new kinds of mistakes, more advanced mistakes.
Okay. So making mistakes isn't always bad. It can be a sign you're reaching for the next level.
Exactly. It's part of the process. Now, if this natural order thing is, so fundamental,
why isn't it like the basis for all language teaching? Textbooks, classes, everything.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? You'd think it would be front and center.
Seems logical.
But the InnerFrench video pointed out this disconnect, a gap between the researchers figuring this stuff out and the teachers in the classroom.
They don't always talk to each other effectively.
Pretty much. Researchers are often focused on the why and the theory. Teachers are dealing with the practical, how big classes, specific curriculum, exams.
And reading dense academic papers probably isn't top of their to-do list.
Exactly. Plus, honestly, there's still not a ton of research on how best to apply this natural order idea directly in teaching.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the studies that have tried to design lessons around these sequences, the results have been kind of mixed. Not always clearly better than traditional methods.
So it's complex to actually implement.
It seems so. Which leads us back to the listener, right? After all this, what should you actually do?
Should you be stressing about finding the perfect grammar sequence? Obsessing over learning verb conjugations in the right natural order?
Definitely not. That's maybe the most freeing takeaway here. You don't need to get bogged down in that.
So what's the alternative?
According to this perspective, language learning, that deep acquisition, it happens mostly through exposure, just interacting with French.
Reading and listening.
Primarily reading and listening to stuff you can mostly understand, comprehensible input. Patience and just showing up consistently are way more important than the exact order you study Rule A versus Rule B.
Your brain will sort of figure out the order itself.
That's the idea. Your internal system develops naturally as you engage with the language.
Okay, that is a relief. So this natural order is kind of working away in the background.
Yeah, doing its thing.
While our main job is just to, use French. Engage with it meaningfully.
Exactly. Which ties in perfectly with the Français Authentique video. That one's all about building an effective, practical routine.
Right, this feels like the what to do now part.
It really is. Understanding the theory is one thing, but having a solid routine, that's how you get the consistent interaction needed.
And Français Authentique emphasized what you do and doing it regularly, right? Not so much when.
Absolutely. Consistency is key. And they really push these, quote, natural learning methods. meaning using authentic French stuff, things you actually find interesting, content where you understand like maybe 70% or more.
Comprehensible input again.
Yep. And using those little pockets of dead time in your day, commute, coffee break, whatever.
Right, so what activities did they suggest?
They had 5 main ones. First, listening to French music and actually singing along.
Fun. How does that help specifically?
Vocabulary, definitely. Pronunciation practice. And importantly, it creates positive vibes, positive emotions linked to French, which helps memory.
Yeah, I can see that. Blasting Strumme is way better than feeling guilty about grammar. What's number 2?
Watching French films, TV series, shows, with or without subtitles, depending on where you're at.
Classic immersion technique.
Totally. Great for listening skills, picking up natural expressions, vocabulary and context. They even suggested watching something like Friends in French if you already know it well in English.
Oh, that's clever.
Right.
Removes the stress of following the plot.
Exactly. Makes it easier to focus on the language. Third was reading books, newspapers, articles online.
Okay, more input.
Right. But reading lets you go at your own pace. You can look things up, really notice the grammar. They mentioned starting with comic books, maybe joining a reading club.
Good ideas. Keeps it active if you can't speak much. Number 4.
Writing in French. Even short things.
Mm.
Messages, emails, maybe keeping a simple journal.
Okay, switching from input to output.
Yep, it makes you actively use the language, think about constructing sentences, gives you time to reflect, unlike spontaneous speaking.
Makes sense. And the 5th one,
Predictably, actually practicing speaking with native speakers.
the ultimate goal for many.
For sure. Finding language exchange partners, maybe getting a tutor. They mentioned their own academy as one option.
Right, so direct interaction.
It's crucial for fluency, pronunciation feedback, just getting comfortable using the language in real time. The big message, though, was fitting these things into your life regularly.
A little and often is better than a huge cramming session once a month.
Definitely. And they also really stress knowing your why. Why are you learning French?
Motivation.
Yeah. Having a clear goal, something that excites you, makes sticking to that routine so much easier.
That motivation aspect, it connects really well to the insights from Florence Test, the expert from TV5 Mondi.
It really does. Her perspective adds this layer of passion and human connection to it all.
You can really feel her dedication, right? Teaching French, especially abroad, like she did in Asia.
Yeah.
It's not about getting rich.
No, she said it's driven by passion, a love for the language, and connecting with students from all over.
Her experience in China and Hong Kong sounded amazing. She mentioned the students' respect.
Yeah, that feeling of really contributing something valuable, sharing the language, the culture.
That image of them standing up when she came in, wow, speaks volumes.
It really does. And her take on Francophony was interesting, too, not just about speaking the same language.
More than that.
Yeah, for her, it's about shared values, a sort of universal link you can feel, even with people who seem very different culturally.
Like the language creates this common ground.
Exactly. She sees it with her diverse students now in Montpellier. They all share this enthusiasm for French.
And that led her to create that magazine, right? LCFF.
Langue et culture française et francophone. Yeah.
Yeah.
The goal was to make engaging French reading accessible to learners at different levels.
Different culture, not just grammar.
Right. And it reached people in like 200 countries, which just shows that global interest. Even though it eventually stopped for economic reasons, creating it really showed that passion for helping learners connect.
Okay, so bringing this all together then, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main things for you, the listener, to hold on to?
Well, first, this idea of a natural acquisition order, it probably exists happening in the background, but
Don't sweat it.
exactly. Don't obsess over finding the perfect study order. Focus instead on consistent, enjoyable engagement with real French.
Music, movies, reading, writing, speaking. Find what you like.
Yes, mix it up, keep it interesting. And remember that underlying passion, the cultural connection that Florence Test talked about, that can be a huge motivator.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. Try to lean into that natural process. Build a routine that feels good, that's filled with things you actually want to do in French.
Think about what part of French culture or communication really sparks your interest. Is it music, cinema, connecting with people, history?
And then how can you bring more of that specific spark into your daily learning?
Yeah. Nurture your own reasons, your own passion. Trust that your understanding will grow kind of organically as you keep engaging. So what is it for you? What really lights that fire to learn French? And how can you fan those flames today?